Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today on ClueCon Weekly. So before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. IT Expo is happening next week in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the Free Switch team is gonna be there. Not only that, but you could catch live Free Switch training on February 12th. This is an all-day event. There's going to be several sessions where you can learn how to install and configure a working FreeSwitch system, all for only $25. So if you're going to be at IT Expo, don't miss out on that. Anthony Minasali is also going to be doing a panel and a talk. You can catch him in the open source world for his panel, and you can catch his talk from open source to mainstream, bringing complex technology to the masses. So don't miss out on that. And last but not least, this is ClueCon Weekly, so of course we have some ClueCon news. If you are interested in sponsoring ClueCon, there are still some sponsorship opportunities available. This is a great way to get tons of exposure to the community, and the earlier you sign up, the more exposure you're going to get. So we offer exhibitor space, speaking slots, refreshments at our conference events, popular networking events, and more. So if you're interested in sponsoring any of that, you can email Sharon@freeswitch.com for more information. And that's all I have for today, so we can get back to David Duffett for ClueCon Weekly.
We're back with another
And if you are interested
ClueCon Weekly, and this week, not one guest, but two. We've got James Bodie and Andy Smith, both from Telit Research. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hurrah! Hello.
Hello.
It's very good to have, very good to have you along. You'll both be known to a ClueCon Weekly audience, I'm sure, because of your various engagement in ClueCons and Astricons and dangerous demos over the years. But before we talk about anything else, you both have rich and varied histories in the world of telecoms. Let's start with you, James, and then move to Andy. I wonder if you can just tell us how you got into the world of telecoms, and then how that brought you into the world of open source, and kind of bring us up to date with what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I think at the age of 4, I developed a bit of a passion for doing things with telephones. At the age of 14, somebody gave me an old tank radio, World War II tank radio, and said, "There you are, lad, fix that." And so I did. At the age of 16, I went off to Army Technical College and ended up doing 22 years service in the regular army in the Royal Corps of Signals. Then fell out the top of my tree and kind of retired to do more telecoms. Part of that, I ended up being one of the very first people doing a public commercial VoIP offering. In those days, it was very early Asterisk. And you remember the heady early days of Asterisk, where you could run an Asterisk box up to about 300, 400 concurrent users. Then you'd hit the wall, the famous Asterisk wall, and the whole thing would go and die. So I think we were one of the first people to work out or discover this wonderful new application called SIP Express Router, which you could then drop multiple instances of Asterisk in and use that as a way of getting around the infamous Asterisk wall. And that's where I met the wonderful Ed Guy for the first time, when he was CTO for Jeff Pulver. And we built the first big UK public VoIP offering, something called GossipTel. We got up to about 120,000 before we got assimilated by someone. So that was my way into VoIP. And later on, just by accident, I kind of fell into mobile, bumped into the infamous James Tagg, who is reasonably well known in Free Switch and Signal Wires circles. Bumped into him in Stockholm, where he had an early version of TruePhone, which just wasn't working at all. To which
Would that have been a VON show, James?
Sorry?
Would that have been a VON show in Stockholm? Because I remember there was a VON in Stockholm.
Yeah, you remember the VON shows with the pulver parties? How marvelous they were.
In Stockholm and Berlin, I seem to remember.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the outrageous things that we got up to at those parties. But anyway, that's in the dim and distant past.
Yeah, do carry
And I
on
ended
quickly.
up, yeah, very quickly. Yeah, to cut a long story short, I ended up joining James Tagg as one of the founder members of the True Phone team. There are 5 of us when we started, and I was there for what 10, 11 years in True Phone, and somewhere along the way, I bumped into Andy. So that's probably a good segue to talk about Mr. Smith.
Okay, over
Who
to you, Andy.
doesn't have it? I don't have anything like the history that James does. It's nothing like as interesting as that, because I did things like, and I went along to look at joining the Royal Signals and decided I couldn't kill people, so I didn't. So I went and became a software engineer instead, and I spent most of my working life, and indeed many years, writing military-based software, mainly for submarines. So nothing to do with telecoms at all. But I decided to have a bit of a change of direction. I ended up doing a VoIP system for an ISP, and that got me involved in listening to and taking part in the Voice User Conference, which means that I got talking to Mr. Bodie, and then we discovered that we both used to talk to each other when he was at 616 at Welbeck College, in the technical college, over the Army radio net. Bizarrely as it was.
Yeah, for cadets. So we used to talk to each other on HF radio.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Do
yeah,
you
indeed.
remember-
Anyway, I ended up working for him at TruePhone, and I've been with him ever since.
It's a dynamic duo. That's the only thing we can call it. Well known in the industry. You don't have to go very far at a ClueCon, Astricon, or Kamat Ilio world to find people that will know very well the kind of things that James Bodie and Andy Smith get up to. And some of them are prepared to talk about it as well.
Yeah, they've been paid.
Blokes, yeah.
Yes, so talking of those things, so thank you for that introduction. By the way, you talked about HF. Do you happen to remember what frequency it was in the HF band that you were using?
5.330 megahertz.
Goodness.
No,
so quite low down in that band.
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say, Jeff?
I used to like 4972.5 kilohertz. Actually, that was my favourite.
I was saying that 4 or 5 megs, of course, it's not quite DC, but it is quite low down in the HF band, because I think HF goes up to about 30 megs, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. But that kind of frequency is ideal for working from one end of the UK to the other end.
Yes, indeed. More like ground wave stuff, I think.
It is skywave, but it's high incidence skywave as opposed to the long skip you get with the higher frequencies. And I happen to know, Mr. Duffett, that you were a bit of a sea beer, good budgie, come back, go away.
I was actually, and now you've mentioned skip. That's what we used to talk about, when the ionospheric conditions were right. And I have talked from the UK to the US of A on 27 megahertz some years ago.
SSB, though. SSB.
Yeah, I think it probably was, but I have used AM as well. Actually, I shouldn't say that in England, although I'm not in England, I'm in Brazil, so we can carry on. Although actually, I think it might even be legalised now because of the European thing. Anyway, that's by the by. So, dangerous demos, James. Can you tell us about the dangerous demos contest in abstract? We will come to talk about the one that's running next month in Florida, but can you talk about it generally? And then can you hand over to Andy to talk about the hijinks and jolly japes that happen around the voting system?
Okay, well, I think dangerous demos was something that was cooked up over a pink cocktail at an Astricon. So I've been coming to Astricon since the start of Astricon, I think, the early days, and I always used to come as a speaker. But after doing it for a number of years, you know what it's like, David. You kind of run out of things to talk about. So I was going, I've got to think of something that will allow me to come as a speaker without putting in too much effort. And that's when we hit on the wonderful concept of doing dangerous demos. At the time, you remember there were people like David Troy who had things like an asterisk-powered robotic vacuum cleaner. And so we hit on the idea of just taking all of these wonderful random bits of technology and putting them together in a kind of competition, a gladiatorial competition, to work out who could run the best wacky asterisk-based demo. And so a concept was born.
I think we have to credit another couple of people in that story as well, and that is young Tim Panton, who
dangerous Tim, yeah,
his danger came from the fact that his demos were usually featuring so many odds and ends cobbled together that's slightly convoluted, that the danger was they might not work. And then there was Ben.
Most of the time they didn't work. That's the fun part.
True. And then there was Ben Clang, who at one stage used a little mini missile launcher, not real missiles, of course, but toy missiles, and also had various other things that created an element of physical danger. And I think one of the things you did, James, was capitalise on the danger element to create the brand that is today the Dangerous Demos.
Yes, I'm just trying to think about the most dangerous demos we have. Probably one of those was the one in which, I think it's Matthew from Matrix, had a full-sized Matrix-controlled drone. So it's quite a big thing. But the problem with it was there's quite a bit of latency in the control loop. So it was very, very difficult to control. And at one stage, this full-sized drone lurched forward and had a go at decapitating, I think it was Dennis from Berlin. Do you remember Dennis in the front row? But Dennis being
indeed.
Cool,
I was there. I remember.
Yeah, he just reached up and pushed it away. But it could have been quite bloody.
Indeed, I do remember Matthew successfully flipping it, getting the drone to do a flip via Matrix, which was quite fun at the time.
Yes, yeah, we've had some really good ones, and along the way we expanded the categories. So when we started off, there was just one category, but today we've got 4 different categories in the competition. The most, so they're the one for the most entertaining, which is the kind of main prize. But then we've got the best crash and burn. This is aimed at the demo that goes most spectacularly wrong, and the idea behind that is to encourage people to take more risk, so you can crash and burn and still win. So that's great. Then we've got what else we've got? We've got the Swan Prize. Yeah, the Swan Prize is really aimed at the kind of demo that's just technically brilliant, but really doesn't seem to have any danger in it at all. And it was
you mean the sort of thing that just works, like an Anthony Minnesala demo.
Yeah, and we really invented that for Anthony Minnesala, because Anthony did this series of absolutely technically brilliant demos. But you know what he's like. I mean, he's so cool about when he executes these things. There's no feeling of danger at all. They just work, and they work brilliantly. Even when he codes the thing like 30 seconds before, they just work. I mean, Anthony is just absolutely brilliant, but he wasn't winning anything, and he desperately wanted to win a dangerous demo prize. So we invented the Swan Prize for that. And then we've got Andy's favorite class of prize, which is the audience vote. So Andy, tell us about the audience vote.
Tell you about the audience vote. Well, when we first tried it, we tried to thought, okay, this is a VoIP conference. We'll do it via SIP. And that was an absolute disaster, because everybody immediately set up bots that just whacked it was an asterisk box, I think, at the time. Just hit it so hard with so many different SIP addresses that the voting was just ridiculous. But hacking the votings does seem to be shall we say, part of the entertainment of the whole thing. So we've ended up and used for some while now. It's just an SMS vote, and it depends on the technology behind it as to what you can do in terms of checking. So we can do things like depending on what I'm able to do now, I could actually check which cell the SMS comes from, which is
But don't
is
give all your
quite good.
secrets away. Don't tell
okay.
everybody your secret.
So
Otherwise, we know that certain gentlemen will be trying to get around that, don't we?
yes, well,
Is this the point of the show where we have to give a special honourable mention to Alex Kinch for a moment?
it might well be. I mean, he has had his picture up on there for attempting to hack many, many times, but he was successful in hacking the system on more than one occasion. I mean, I learned all about SMS numbers that are used in the television industry through Mr. Kinch. When we had votes from all of them. 1 year.
He's not the only bad guy, is he? I mean, there's also Cesare Sivak, who, interestingly, both Alex and Cesare both are ex-true phoners. So I guess we taught them everything they know. Well, no, that's not true, but
it's not really true.
And
but
there are
Cesare, of course, works for Nexmo, which is a little bit of a cheat, using Nexmo's infrastructure. But he's not the only one who does it. There are indeed people on who are part of SignalWire who like to cheat a little, don't they, Mr. West?
Well, they've had a go, haven't they? Not been hugely successful, I hasten to add.
Well, it is interesting the way that it works, but frankly, the biggest problem with the audience vote system is keeping up with James's last-second changes to all the running order and the people who are actually taking part.
But funny you should say that, Andy, because there's one other award which I wanted to mention. That is the judges' vote. And when I wrote the blurb, the description for Dangerous Demos for the Open Source World website, I thought, how can I describe the judges' vote? And the best description I could get was a hastily assembled bunch of reprobates choose their favourite. I thought that was a reasonable description of what goes, because the part of the Dangerous Demo's excitement is the fact that it is hastily assembled and somewhat last minute, as you were just saying.
Always, because nobody comes to an event thinking, I've got a dangerous demo that I'm going to do. Nobody ever does that. And so one of the most exciting bits is going around and blackmailing people to participate against their will in the 2 days before we go on.
I think you may be pleasantly surprised at the next iteration of this. I know at least 2 people that are preparing.
Yes, that is a change that we've attempted to make, is to try and prompt people to think about it before the event itself, because this is the first time that there will have been a Dangerous Demos at Open Source World, and there's a very good reason for that. It's because it's the very first Open Source World in Florida. So just Andy and James, whoever would like to take this, just talk about the different shows or different events at which Dangerous Demos have featured so far.
Andy, go for it.
Well, okay. Well, my experience of this is at the actual shows is somewhat limited compared to James. I've not been able to travel for the last few years, so I've not managed to do Asterisk for the last 3 years, and I haven't done ClueCon for the last 3 years either. But so Astricon really was the first ones, but the most fun has always been either ClueCon or Camellia World. The Astricon ones tended to be a little less on the fun side. I don't know why particularly, but it's just the way that these things seem to fall out. But Camellia World is perhaps my favourite actually. That might be because it's a smaller conference. It's a more select group of people, and we tend to know them all, and so it's more of a bunch of mates than a conference attended by many different people. So yeah, Camellia World really, but ClueCon of course is probably there's probably more people in the room at ClueCon than there is anywhere else.
Yes, and at ClueCon there was the added fun, either last year or the year before, I forget which, where there was a robot walking around with your face, Andy. Or not walking around, wiggling around.
Yeah, well, I like to have a flat face. It's the thing to do. If I can't be there in person, you've got to be there somehow, haven't you?
Lots of fun.
That was a huge amount of fun because Michael Graves rigged up the robot with a headset mic. So Andy was not only able to prowl around attacking people, but he could also join in with the commentary, which was quite amusing, really.
Yeah, it was great. And Andy, did you actually have control of the robot in terms of which direction it went?
Yeah, indeed. And the feedback from the robot in terms of the camera is quite interesting because you need to have the camera pointed at the floor all the time because there's all these table legs and chair legs and everything around. You have to move around. So yes, that was quite fun.
Yeah, and ClueCon is also perhaps where one of the most memorable dangerous demos was, and I refer to the incident where somebody had, I think it was Mark Crane from Fusion PBX, had Fusion PBX running on a Raspberry Pi Zero, strapped it to a battery pack, wrapped it up in bubble wrap, quite considerable amount of bubble wrap, and then different people threw it around the room. And I think I'm right in saying that either Dan York or I think it was Andy Abrahamson. Andy, if that's how you say it, Andy Abrahamson. He drop kicked the thing from the back of the room to the front as well. And all of this was happening while Mark Crane was actually adding users to the PBX that was getting kicked around the room.
That was just
Do you remember any other standout performances?
Yeah, and the funny thing is that almost didn't happen because Mark certainly wasn't going to do a demo, and he only did it because I forced him to. And about 10 minutes before we went on, I went up to him and said, "Mark, what are you going to do then?" He said, "Well, I'm going to demonstrate how you can configure the PBX thing, the free switch PBX, in under 3 minutes." And I went, "No, you're not. That's a bit boring. You've got to make it a bit more dangerous." And he went, "Oh," and I thought I'd frightened him off. He actually went off, and I thought, "Oh dear." But he turned up. He and his sidekick turned up with all this stuff that from around the place, and they put it all together, and the whole thing just worked. And that's one of the brilliant things about dangerous demos, is that you very quickly find out who the really, really, really good engineers are, because it takes a really good engineer to put together something at the drop of a hat that just works every time. You've got to really know what you're doing. And that's one of the reasons why we've got to have an Anthony Minnesala demo at Dangerous Demos, because you never know what you're going to get, but every time it's just brilliant. So
yes,
you wouldn't happen to know. You wouldn't happen to know whether Seven Do's coming over, would you? Because he's always.
I don't know the answer. Yes, Seven's a great contributor. I have been talking to Tony behind the scenes, Anthony Minnesali, hoping that he will do a dangerous demo. But just coming back to the Raspberry Pi Zero in the bubble wrap for one moment, it's a great example of a dangerous demo that technically actually wasn't that complicated, but gave great entertainment value. and I think that should be held up to people as a good example that you don't have to go, some of the complicated demos are great, but you don't have to go to town on the technical side. You can just amp up the entertainment value.
Absolutely. And then in the run up to this on the text chat thing, we were talking about possible demos, and we hit upon the idea that perhaps it would be wonderful if Alison wrapped herself up in bubble wrap and threw herself into the audience.
Did you really say that, James?
Yeah, but I retracted.
Andy, I'm surprised that you're surprised that James would say that, because I think we both know that James says a lot of things that some other people might not say from time to time. Just bringing it back on the dangerous demos, James, you'll remember last Astricon, I think it was last Astricon, or the one before, again, my memory is a little bit hazy, the wonderful Sylvain Boilly from Oiseau did an incredibly clever, dangerous demo that was something to do with Space Invaders. Do you remember the details of that?
Yes, I do. I mean, how could I forget that one? There's so many really good ones burned on my memory. But basically, what that was it was Asterisk or Free Switch. I can't remember. One of the two.
I'm sure it would be Asterisk with it being an Astricon.
Yeah, it involved people in the audience calling into a PBX and then being able to interact with the main player. And the idea was so when you dialed in, you became a space invader, and the idea was to evade the guy who was shooting you and to get yourself to the top of the screen. And the first person to get to the top of the screen without being eliminated got a prize. That was what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I don't remember all of the details, but I do remember there being a prize, and the prize was a good prize. It was some like Xbox or game console, and I know the guy that won it. It was that Andrew White from Australia who walked away with
dear old Andrew,
prize.
Old White.
What Whitey
dude? Is he turning up for this one?
I don't know if he's going to be at Open Source World, but I'm sure we'll see him at some stage across the year. Yes, now we're drawing towards an end of our time together here, but I would like you to talk, James, a little bit about your session. I know you can't give all the details, but you're going to be at Open Source World talking about some of the things you get up to in Telet research and the use of open source components in the crazy world of mobile.
Indeed. Our mission statement in Telet research is that we build the mobile network core that then can serve other people's own radio access network. So if you want to run your own private radio access network, these days you can probably get the Spectrum in most, certainly in the States and in UK you can find Spectrum. But then you run into the next order of massive difficulty, which is how you run the interconnects and the mobile network core, because that's quite complicated. So what we offer is a back-end core service that comes along and you plug into it. It's a bit like a wholesale SIP trunk service, which provides a VoIP PBX with a back-end service. But ours is a little bit more complex in that we provide a complete mobile core on the back end. And if you want it, you can have SIM cards. And these are not normal SIM cards. These are multi-IMSI SIM cards with multiple crypto, which means that you can run your own authentication and your own service on your own infrastructure. But then if that phone or device then wanders away from your own radio access network, you can still attach to a public radio access and continue the goodness. So I'll be talking at Open Source World about all of the kind of components we use to do that, and talk about how they're hooked together, and talk a little bit about what you can do with it. So there are all kinds of exciting things you can do with it. And interestingly enough, one of the interesting things you can do with it is you can plug SignalWire in the back end of it. So SignalWire can be used to provide you with numbers with voice and SMS, and you can then use SignalWire as an application-based platform so you can run applications in the core as well. So
That-
lots of really wonderful things that you.
Yeah, that's sounding like the basis for a dangerous demo there, James.
Yeah, well, we went through a phase of doing dangerous demos at TAD Summit with Alan Quayle, and in fact, we wouldn't be where we are now if it were not for Alan Quayle challenging us over alcoholic beverages to do various things. I mean, we went along, and Alan Quayle said, one of the problems with this TAD Summit stuff is that most of the applications we've got need a mobile network for them to work with. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody built a mobile network that we could run here at TAD Summit? And I went, I think we can do that. And so we did, didn't we, Andy?
Yeah. It is interesting. The way that the various, in this case, telephony application developers conferences look at this, the infrastructure behind it. I mean, it used to be just good enough to have a bit of Wi-Fi, and now you need everything. There's no excuse. You've got to provide absolutely everything, otherwise people just cannot demonstrate things properly.
And you are there to supply some of those mobile parts.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's where we get our kicks. Remember how exciting VoIP was in the early asterisk days of VoIP. It was really exciting stuff. But these days, VoIP is, it's more of a commodity. So it's got a bit less exciting. So for people like Andy and I, in order to get our adrenaline fix, we've kind of graduated onto mobile, which is kind of the next much more difficult thing. And hopefully we can take a whole load of people from the open source community with us.
Great stuff. Now, in rounding off our conversation, let me offer you both the opportunity, see if there's anything you'd like to say as we close, anything that you thought you should have said earlier on and didn't say, or anything that you'd like to add. I'll start with you, Andy.
Nothing particularly, other than I really have to say publicly, I'm going to say thank you to James, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for that man. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andy. And
what a lovely tribute to Mr. Tag.
And Mr. Tag too, in fact, because Mr. Tag was the one that actually said yes, that James could employ me at TruePhone. So.
Well, that's good.
I would like to say thank you to the entire open source community, because without open source, we just couldn't do the things that we do. So definitely in the mobile space, if you buy proprietary bits of kit from Nokia or Ericsson or one of the other big players, you just can't abuse it in the same way. It's all built so you get a certain level of functionality and you can't do anything else. And if you want to change anything, you have to raise a change request, and that's €600 and wait six months. Whereas open source, in particular FreeSwitch, it's a case of phone up Tony and say, Tony, this bit of behavior, wouldn't it be great if you could do this? And Tony goes, oh, yeah. And 20 minutes later, there's the code, James, try that. And it's just absolutely awesome. There's nowhere else on the planet you can get that kind of turnaround.
It is amazing. I personally never get tired of thanking Mark Spencer and, of course, all of the team that contributed, and the open source contributors, for the gift of Asterisk, and to Tony, Brian, Michael Jerris, etc., for the wonderful gift of FreeSwitch. Both of them are amazing gifts to the world.
Yeah, and the whole setup, it's like having a big extended family, isn't it?
It is. There's a few weird uncles in there, but that's the same with any family.
But then you've got your beautiful sister in the shape of Alison, the queen of open source.
Yeah, I was thinking about her as more of the strange aunt, but there you go.
What? You
Well,
can't say
gentlemen,
I
listen, I'm
can.
going to have to round things up.
that. You have to watch out because the geek community get very, very protective of Alison. You are not allowed to say anything nasty about Alison, otherwise you will be blackballed.
Absolutely.
It feels like
I would just say Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
it feels like things are deteriorating slightly. So let's call things to a halt. Andy Smith and James Bodie of Telep Research, thank you very much for coming on ClueCon Weekly, and we'll look forward to seeing you at an event, whether it's in person or across the screen and camera of a robot. Whatever, we'll look forward to seeing you both soon. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having us,
David.
Dave.